Well, good morning, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones with SP History. We are continuing our series on the deep state. And before I begin today's episode, I want to remind everyone where this is headed. This is headed to we're smack dab in the 50s right now, and all the covert operations uh, that are being operated out of the CIA. And of course, we have established the CIA as being firmly part of the national security apparatus. And we have defined the deep state as the national security apparatus and all the industries that feed it. We've talked about all the industries involved in the national security apparatus, the corporations. We'll get into that, more of that later. But obviously, the CIA and all of our intelligence apparatus is part of the national security apparatus. And of course, the director of the CIA is Alan Dulles. And we've talked about Alan Dulles' role in protecting those corporations during World War II, towards the end of the war, as his dual roles as being the Swiss director of the OSS in Europe and simultaneously a lawyer with Sullivan and Cromwell, whose job it was to protect his corporation's assets that he represents and also their identities, because they've been aiding and abetting the enemy during the World War period. So they'd been committing treason. And so he committed treason to negotiate a secret surrender and immunize all of these former Nazis, bring them to America, and also protect his corporate clients. He is now the director of the CIA. So everything that we are going to be discussing with respect to the CIA is under the direction, under the leadership of Alan Dulles, who is about as connected a guy. He and his brother both, who that simultaneously is running the State Department, John Foster Dulles. These two guys are as connected to the deep state as you can get. So any organization that they are leading is going to be sort of a proxy for the deep state. They're going to be tools of the deep state. So I started off by saying, where are we headed? We are headed to the 60s in the assassination of JFK, followed by the assassination of Malcolm X, followed by two more assassinations, RFK and MLK, and then we'll get to the 70s, and it'll be Watergate. And it'll be my contention that the CIA was firmly involved with all of these, I should rephrase that, the national security apparatus was firmly involved with all of these. That doesn't always mean the CIA, it might mean the FBI, but there was an intelligence uh, aspect to all of those events. Um, and where we are is we're talking about all of the covert ops. Remember now, when the law was passed, it created a super secret subcommittee, the 5412 committee, which was responsible for all of the covert operations, the covert capabilities arm of the CIA. And the cover for all of these covert ops is to stop the spread of communism. But as we learned in the last episode, some of these have nothing to do with the spread of communism. They have everything to do with protecting American business interests, i.e., these deep staters. We started with Operation Paperclip, which is merely an extension of Operation Sunrise. And it's bringing these Nazis to America to maximize their benefits to us in our new war against the Soviets. And then that was in 46 when it began. Then we talked about the takeover, the CIA takeover, the government of Italy, where we rigged an election and then supported our puppet regime over there for the next 15, 16 years, both financially and strategically with intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. You notice it's not a coincidence that 63 is the termination date of this operation, which jives with the assassination of JFK as well. We'll come back to that. And then we got into the psychological warfare, beginning with Operation Bluebird in North Korea, which is handy that we have these Nazi scientists because it is essentially the same research they've been conducting on Jewish concentration camp victims during World War II. This gives them a new pool of test subjects upon whom to conduct their research. And this will eventually morph into Operation or Project MKUltra in Vietnam and then ultimately in the United States itself. Then we learned in 1953 there was a covert operation to overthrow the government in Iran, the democratically elected government, because Mossadegh was trying to preserve Iran's natural resources, which is mainly oil, for the Iranian people. And American companies resented that. And so they pulled strings and got the CIA to launch a coup, an Operation Ajax against Mossadegh to overthrow him and replace him with an American puppet, Pahlavi. And of course, in this operation, I may have mentioned this, I may not, the CIA eventually had to go to Eisenhower and say, hey, we need the help of the U.S. military to finish the job. That's always the hammer, the ultimate hammer. The CIA would start everything, get the ball rolling, and then when the moment was right, they would go to Eisenhower and say, for this operation to ultimately succeed, we need the military. And so it wasn't just the CIA. Coming up, we'll have an episode or two on the Pentagon and its involvement, helping sort of as the tag team, as the CIA and the military working together. And then as I mentioned, in 50, move my picture here, 53 to 73, we have a long-running operation, again, psych warfare, a continuation of what started in North Korea, this time continuing in Vietnam, where we have POWs, and we also have basically unarmed citizens who are not fighting us, but they are in the wrong place at the wrong time, and we're taking them captive through Project Phoenix as part of this psych warfare research. And this is what they called MKUltra. MK stands for mind control, using the German version of the word control, spelled with a K. And an ultra was Alan Dulles' contribution to the project name, because he felt like this would be the silver bullet, the weapon of all weapons. If you can, through hypnosis and drugs, literally control people, program people to do what you want, do things that they don't even want to do, but you now control their central command center, their brain. And then afterwards, they'll have severe amnesia where they have no memory of what they just did. It's the ultimate weapon. This was approved by Alan Dulles, and he appointed Sidney Gottlieb to be in charge of it. Sidney Gottlieb is pictured there. This program began in Vietnam, again, because of the presence of all these test subjects upon whom they can do their research. And you needed, it was a controversial program once it became publicized, because you're requiring experimentation upon human beings without their approval. And if you remember, that came right out of the concentration camps of Germany. That's what these German doctors and these scientists needed. They don't want to research on pigs and cows. They want to research on humans. And Alan Dulles brought these scientists and doctors back to America with the promise that they could continue their research. And that's what he's done. He's provided them with a pool of research test subjects in North Korea, now Vietnam. And these doctors are using LSD, they're using hypnosis, shock treatments to create these zombies that they can create. They can transform into saboteurs, into assassins, whatever they need. And then they would be afflicted with this amnesia and not have any memory of it. And the program in Vietnam was called the Phoenix program. And it was estimated that our government presided over the deaths of 40,000 South Vietnamese civilians during this program. These were folks that we said were collaborators with the NLF, uh, from North Vietnam or the Viet Cong, but that's a dubious claim at best. Uh, Basically, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. These are villagers, these are peasants mainly, and if they wouldn't help us, uh, actively help us, we would smear them with this collaborator label and then use them as test subjects in this program. Some of the program involved even torture. I mean, you could make a case all of it was torture, but the 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 drugs and the skulls being partially removed, hooking up electrodes to these people's brains, knowing full well this was fatal. It was going to kill all these people. And then when the war ended and we didn't have these unfortunate Vietnamese victims anymore, the program came to America, and we used people on university campuses. We used them in hospitals. We used people from prisons. We used people even in the military. And here are some of the 44 colleges and universities partook in this program. All these different research foundations, pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, prisons, all were. And this is one of the cases where the CIA was violating the law by operating domestically. Not supposed to be operating domestically, but in MK Ultra, there was no, by their own admission and their own documents, they were operating domestically. And then I went through and took you through some of the victims, famously Whitey Bulger, Jack Ruby, Sirhan, Charles Manson, Ted Kaczynski. I told you the story of Ted Kaczynski, and of course the program got exposed by the church hearings in the mid-70s, and that's when families started putting two and two together, realizing what had happened to their sons when they went to the military or went to college, how they got recruited into these programs or steered into these programs, as was the case with Ted Kaczynski. They sued the CIA, they won, and the CIA had to pay damages to these families. John Gittinger, who was a CIA psychologist, publicly testified later that MK Ultra had been a terrible mistake. He's only saying that for public consumption, right? Because they got caught. And they weren't renouncing the knowledge, the research that they gained from all those years of torturing all those poor unfortunates. But anyway, I left off there because the video had gone on quite a while. Today, I want to add a little addendum to this MK Ultra story. I told you there were a lot of fingers, that MK Ultra went off in a lot of different directions. And this is one of the directions. And this is important because this is going to play into the assassinations when we get to the 60s. And the point of this little episode, this little scenario, is Alan Dulles realizing to carry out these covert ops, they were going to need some tricks of the trade, some magic tricks, so to speak, to teach their agents so that they had plausible deniability. They could steer the suspicion in a direction of a patsy all the time instead of in their direction. And this was not something that just was random or happenstance or coincidental. This was the result of conscious decisions by Alan Dulles to bring in the preeminent magician, American magician. His name is John Mulholland. He was the most famous American magician of his day. He performed in many countries. It was estimated 40 countries by that point. He was an author. He'd published 10 books about magic. There's a couple of them here. He was an editor of a well-known magic trade magazine called The Sphinx. And then in 53, he resigned from that magazine to fill a new role. And that was after he'd been requested by Alan Dulles to come to the CIA, train his agents, his officers, and also write a manual, a book for the CIA to use in future training sessions on deception and manipulation. And so this coincides with the beginning of the MK Ultra program here in America in 53. He ends up dying in 70, 3 years before the program was terminated. But now, this guy part of the reason why there were other magicians, but this guy was requested specifically by Alan Dulles because he had some of the same connections that Alan Dulles had. They traveled the same circles. For example, Mulholland was his career. One of his main benefactors throughout his career was the Rockefeller family, especially Nelson Rockefeller, pictured here at the top right. Nelson Rockefeller was a booster of John Mulholland. No, the Rockefeller family and the Rockefeller Foundation are deeply entrenched in this nexus between public and private sector, these public sector corporations, these private sector corporations, and the public sector, which is the government. And in the merging of those two, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller name, obviously big in the private sector as far as corporations are concerned and the ultra vires doctrine, but also got very politically active. Nelson Rockefeller ran for president, you know. Mulholland's wife was named Pauline, and her maiden name was Pierce. Pierce is also the maiden name of Barbara Bush, the wife of George Herbert Walker Bush. In other words, Pauline Pierce was related to Barbara Bush, which means the Mulhollands and the Bushes were friends because the Leibs were related. Pauline Pierce was also a distant cousin of a former U.S. president, Franklin Pierce, and as such came from a very wealthy family. Her daddy, Arthur Pierce, was a brigadier general in the U.S. Army. You see the picture here of in the middle there, that is Barbara and George H.W. Bush getting married. So she's dropping her name Pierce, becoming a Bush, and at the bottom there's Franklin Pierce, the family, the most famous family member, former president. So Mulholland has the right connections, and as we learned when we were talking about in part one of the formation of the deep state, this series, one of the main tenets of the deep state, or the power elites, whatever you want to call them, was that they were birds of a feather and they stuck together. They intermarried. They went to school together, all the same schools. They intermarried. All the social clubs they belonged to. They traded off board seats with each other in their various companies, and they were very. It was very inbred. So you see that Mulholland has the right breeding. He comes from the right stock. This is the official CIA manual of trickery and deception that was written by John Mulholland. The CIA, according to documents, paid him $3,000 to write this manual, and it's a manual on misdirection, concealment, and stagecraft. We'll get some of the specifics here in a minute. Now, in '73, when mkultra was discovered, the CIA attempted to destroy all of the documentation, and that was incriminating. And they got most of it, but they missed some of it because they had it in different locations. And it was thought that the manual that John Mulholland had written for the CIA had been destroyed with everything else. But recently, some of these manuals have resurfaced and have now been republished. And we now know John Mulholland's role in the CIA's training program. The topics of this manual, there's lots of different topics in there. Like, for example, working with a partner in a clandestine manner so as not to be discovered. One of the operational requirements of mkultra was to slip pills or Mickeys, whatever, into the drinks of an unsuspecting mark. Some of these drugs that they were using, and of course they had to be unsuspecting, otherwise you get into performance, right? What you're trying to do is do research on people who didn't know research was being conducted on them. They had to be able to surreptitiously be able to slip these drugs into people's drinks, and Mulholland knew how to do that, how to use sleight of hand and trick people's eyes or use diversions. the removal of objects by women, like, for example, if you're going to steal someone's wallet or plant something on somebody. But the main thing that he taught was the art of diversion. This was what was that took up most of the space in this manual, was teaching the CIA assets the art of diversion, sleight of hand illusions to confuse the eyes, for example. And then, of course, you understand magicians are, this is what they do, right? They get you watching what the right hand's doing, meanwhile the left hand's doing something else. And by the time your eyes realize uh, what's going on, the magic trick has happened, and you didn't see what they didn't want you to see because you're watching what they wanted you to watch. The use of a patsy to visually and audibly confuse the witnesses. This became extremely important going forward in these covert operations, especially with respect to, say, assassinations, where you use a patsy to visually distract people, divert people's attention away from where the action is. You're watching a person run across a roof, or you're watching somebody, a shadow in a window, or like in Sirhan's case, you walk into the kitchen there at the Ambassador Hotel, and he's waiting for you with a gun. He's firing at you, and everyone's facing him. And that's the visual diversion. Everyone's looking at him. Meanwhile, the kill shot on RFK came from behind his right ear. So no one saw the kill shot. No one saw the person who fired the kill shot because they're all watching the visual diversion. Um, Same thing in MLK. You got everybody looking at the flop house while the kill shot comes from the bushes. JFK, you got everybody looking at the Texas School Book Depository building while the kill shot comes from the from behind the picket fence. In the Malcolm X, you have the diversion in the back of the ballroom where the two men are arguing and physically fighting one another, while the kill shot happens right in front of Malcolm X, in front of the stage. Everyone's turning around looking at the back, while the kill shot comes from the front. You can go on and on. Some of the more recent events that occurred use the same tricks of the trade, visually getting people looking in one direction while the action, the covert op, happens in another place, and nobody sees it. Same thing with audible sounds. That was the Texas School Book Depository. The first shot came from that direction, getting everybody to turn looking that direction, right? Using sound. You can go through all of these different covert ops and these assassinations that we're going to get to. And it's a combination of visual and audible sounds that divert people's attention away, while and focus on whatever patsy has been set up in each one of those cases, while the perpetrator, the real perpetrator, is free to carry out the act and, I might add, get away, while everyone is focused in on the visual and audible diversion. And the art of this, the art of illusion taught by John Mulholland to the CIA assets and agents and officers, the CIA in general, through the writing of this manual, was the main point of hiring John Mulholland, is to teach these people how to do things in broad daylight, in front of crowds of people, and still get away with it and not be detected. And I thought, though this is not a covert operation in the lineage of all these covert operations that we're going through, I thought it was important to add this as part of the mkultra. It's about controlling people's minds, and how the CIA uses these magic tricks, so to speak. They understand that the eyes will play tricks on you, and you can aid that process. You can help that process along by adding in a diversion, or creating an echo effect by carrying out the assassination in a small confined setting where you know there's going to be echoes that's going to confuse the mind of the witnesses as to where the shots came from. It's all intentional. That's all intentional. You look at the arenas where these assassinations took place. Dealey Plaza is a small place, very small, surrounded by high-rise buildings, and uh, there were one of the very first tactics used against witnesses was to try to confuse them in the aftermath by saying, well, what they heard was echoes. Whenever they would say, well, I heard a shot come from the train yard or from the railroad tracks or the railroad bridge or behind the picket fence, uh, there were witnesses who did say that. And the investigators all used the word echoes to confuse a lot of these witnesses. That's intentional. You saw the same thing in the small little confined space where Martin Luther King was killed. You saw the same thing in the small little confined space where RFK was killed. Uh, Echoes. You're not hearing what you think you're hearing. You're not seeing what you think you're seeing. And that's all intentional to confuse the witnesses. And just like a magic trick to cause people to second guess what their own eyes saw or what their own ears heard. And that way, the narrative can be constructed or crafted by the perpetrators, which in all of these cases are intelligence professionals who know how to do this, who are experts in this. Why? Because they were taught the art of illusion by the world's most preeminent magician, John Mulholland, and they went through his training program. So they're experts in creating this confusion. So this is uh, this is an important little facet of what we're going to be looking at going forward. Mulholland's contributions were all part of MK Ultra, was part of the MK Ultra program, which was obviously an effort to control people's minds. And I throw in here a couple references that came out in some of these documents that were released in the mid 70s, the church hearings. One of the documents authored by Sidney Gottlieb and James Angleton. Sidney Gottlieb, as you remember, pictured here on the left, is the head of the MK Ultra program, assigned by Allen Dulles. James Angleton is the head of the CIA counterintelligence program. He was hired by Allen Dulles. So these guys are, uh, you know, in thick with this program. And according to this document, they wrote, quote, a well-known New York-based magician, John Mulholland, would begin training classes for CIA officials at the Hotel Roosevelt on the 1st of November, 1954. That's supposed to be 53. That's a misprint. I typed the wrong number in there. 1953, when the program began. So this is from the CIA's own cache of documents, which ties John Mulholland in with MK Ultra. Anything that Sidney Gottlieb is involved in with the CIA in 1953 or 54 is all MK Ultra. That's the only thing he was in. That was his project. That was his baby. Also, Gottlieb instructed Mulholland as follows regarding his role in the project. This is in another document, quote, send all written reports to Granger Research Company. Remember, the CIA has a multiplicity of front companies that they use as a way to launder information or to hide information. This communication is taking place to hide their role, and they would create these front companies. You saw this especially down in Miami, by the time we get to 63, and all the different goings on there with respect to the anti-Castro activities, hundreds of front companies. Anyway, in this case, this MK Ultra program involving John Mulholland was being run through a CIA front called the Granger Research Company. He continues on, he says, quote, call us collect in the event of anything of concern or out of the ordinary. Use only those names on the Granger stationery when corresponding with us by wire, telephone, or written letters. So just a couple little anecdotes there to prove to basically back up and corroborate John Mulholland's contributions to MK Ultra. And then, of course, though in the mid 70s they couldn't find his manual, it did turn up later. So that is what I wanted to cover today. And I think this is a good place to terminate today's video because it is a story unto itself, but it's going to come into play later when we start getting into the assassinations and you see the same pattern repeated. There's always a patsy, there's always a diversion, there's always a, a confusing of the witnesses as to what they saw and what they heard. And you end up with the narrative. The only one who is sure, the only entity that seems sure about what happened is the those that are investigating. Of course, it seems like the ones investigating are always the ones that are involved carrying out the crime. For example, when you get to the JFK assassination, the Warren Commission is investigating, and who's running the Warren Commission? Don't for a second think it was Chief Justice Earl Warren. He was just a figurehead. The guy running it was the number 2 ranking official on the Warren Commission. That was Alan Dulles. So you got the Fox investigating the hen house. When you get to all the other assassinations, it's either going to be the FBI or CIA, and they are the ones crafting the narratives. And all the witnesses are the ones being guided into that narrative by being told that if their account differs from the narrative, it's because they heard echoes or they didn't really see what they thought they saw. But most people got sucked into the narrative because they saw the diversion that the CIA or the FBI or whoever had prepared in advance to purposely steer people's attention, both visually and audibly, to the patsy. And that's why guys like Lee Harvey Oswald, James Earl Ray, Sirhan got set up the way they did because they were prepared in advance with a cover story, which is another CIA tactic. To have a cover story, that was James Angleton's part. Angleton prepared the cover story, and Mulholland taught the CIA how to prepare the diversions. And then you put those two together, and then after the event, you drop it on the media, which carries your water for you, and it fills in all the blanks, and that becomes the official narrative. And it was all purposeful, it was all designed, it was all taught by John Mulholland and carried out by the CIA in these covert ops. And of course, Angleton was a key figure in all of that. So that's enough for today. Thank you for joining. Please consider subscribing to my channel. Also, please smash the like button and consider sharing this channel with other people. And if you feel inclined, go ahead and comment. And I try to get to those comments and respond. Thank you. Until next time, God bless.